Hello, everyone.
Am I on? Yes, I'm finally on. We've got many people trickling in still, but welcome. My name is Christy Clark. I'm going to be the facilitator for this panel. Is it afternoon already? Man, how did that happen? But before we get started, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of which we're meeting here today, of the Ngunnawal people, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and also welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today to this festival. So welcome to the Zero Waste Revolution Festival. This panel is Be a Hero of Zero. I'm Christy Clark. You might have noticed I'm wearing a shirt. I work for Give It. It's a not-for-profit that matches items that you have with people that need them most. But I'm also one of the festival coordinators, so I might pop up and talk about what we do at some point. But what this panel is all about is an opportunity for us to really have a conversation around what we can do as a Canberra community to start putting more initiatives into practice that are going to have a global impact. So it's really looking at the festival theme this year is all about one person, a world of difference. So it's trying to move that away from that place of I'm only one person. If I only take this action, is it really going to make an impact on a global scale? So we're going to have that conversation about answering those questions, yes or no, and kind of have that working conversation about what we can and should be doing as a community. I'm joined here by three fabulous panelists. Over at the end, there's Julie Bolton. She is working with the Monash Sustainability Development Institute. Got that right, I think. But she'll give an introduction into her incredible insights and accolades in this waste reduction space. Then we are joined by, thank you for coming, Minister Shane Rattenbury, who is a member of our Legislative Assembly for the ACT Greens, and Karen Aguilera, who has just launched today officially. She is the Australian representative for the Go Zero Waste app, which everyone should know about before you leave today, because it's a fantastic app to help us all make sure that when we're going places to different shops and businesses, we're supporting those businesses that are zero waste inclined and practicing. So how today is going to work is this is a community festival. It's not about me and our panelists sitting up here and just talking at you. We want to hear the questions from you. So I might kick it off with getting our panelists to give a few words, a little bit more background about who they are and what they do. But then we can start opening it up to the floor of any questions that you want to ask to our panelists, and we'll get the conversation rolling. So whoever wants to start, don't all jump in at once. Yeah, that's on, right?
Hi everyone, Julie Bolton. I work at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, where we look at global problems and we try and work out how we can make them local and answer them with a local solution. So there's a whole range of different people at the Institute. There's the Climate Works Centre. It was Climate Works Australia. It's just been renamed Climate Works Centre, where they specialise in climate solutions, and they work internationally as well as domestically. Behaviour Works. So a big part of today is about changing behaviour. So Behaviour Works has a whole team of behavioural scientists that actually focus on how you go about changing the behaviour of people to solve big world problems. There's a research team, so there's a whole heap of PhD students that do a lot of research in, again, big issues. And some of them will take it down to the lower level. So a PhD student, a recently finished PhD student who works with me now, her PhD for the last 4 years was all on energy and community forums and community engagement on making energy more local. I think it was an awesome PhD and she's amazing, so it's awesome to have her now staying with the Institute. And then there's an education team, and they do a lot of executive education and a lot of master's students who come in and want to know more about education. And then there's me and a very small team called Policy and Impact. And what we try and do is do a lot of translation. So we take a lot of the research, we take a lot of the big picture theory, and we speak to businesses, governments. I work a lot with local, state governments and authorities. A lot of businesses, as I said, a bit with the federal government, and we try and explain what the latest thinking is and what the big picture thinking is and how we need to be more aware of it and feed it into our day jobs. My big interest area is on the Sustainable Development Goals. I work a lot educating everyone about what the Sustainable Development Goals are, why they're so important, how they came about. So I talk a lot about planetary boundaries, donut economics, wellbeing. I do a lot of work on wellbeing indexes, wellbeing frameworks, and how we need to shift our notion of progress and how all of that fits in with the SDGs and big picture sustainable development. And it's fascinating, very tiring, very exhausting, and sometimes very sad and very depressing. But I remain hopeful. On the side, I run a little local podcast called Local Environment Heroes. I don't know whether anyone's heard of that. It's an ACT one. I sit on the board of the Canberra Environment Centre and really look to activate that local solution. So while I do big picture thinking, we then try and work out how can you use that big picture to really stimulate on the ground thinking. Responsible production and consumption, SDG 12 is my baby, and I'm happy to talk about that forever. I do a lot of work in sustainable fashion, which again, I will talk about further, I think, in some of the answers, because there's lots we could talk about and unpack about the individual choices we make as to what we wear and how important that is for big picture sustainable development. So that's me.
Awesome, thank you, Julie. Shane, do you want to go for it?
Thanks very much. Well, in thinking about this panel today, I think there's a couple of points I'd make at the start of the discussion. The first is there's often a real debate about the relative merit of individual action versus big corporate action or political action. And what we see commonly, particularly in the climate change debate from the fossil fuel industry, is an attempt to push it back to the individual, where they talk about things like, oh, measure your carbon footprint or learn to recycle or, all the sort of things that we can individually do. And I think it's really important that we call out those denialist tactics of corporates trying to push it back on individuals and drive that. It's often described as the individual guilt motive. And I think it's really important that we do call that out. We reject the notion that it's all going to be done by the individual, but equally not diminish the real power and value of individual action. Because the reality is, given the urgency of the challenges that we face, we actually need both, and we need both in spades. And so I think it's really useful to think about that in the context of having a discussion about individual behaviour. The second thing when it comes to individual behaviour particularly is our ability to change the social licence. Because what we have to do is remove the social licence for waste. We have to remove the social licence that says it's okay to present a good to us with 3 layers of plastic wrapping on it. It's okay to present us with goods that are not compostable or not recyclable, can't have a second life or even a third life. And so when we think about that, there's so many things that the social licence has vanished for over years, or a new social licence has been created. Think about child labour, marriage equality in Australia. The way we've changed the social licence on those things has been driven by individual action often, but it's also involved significant political action or large-scale action to ultimately make the change. And so as we think about the waste discussion particularly, I think one of the key things as individuals we can do is work on that notion of social licence and how we can change it. And that can be from a campaigning point of view, it can be from an individual business point of view, and think of some of all the people that are out in the foyer with the amazing projects they're running. But it can also be in that daily behaviour of making sure that we take a key cup to the coffee shop, because in the coffee shop's getting that social licence, it says that message that says it's not okay for me to give out disposable cups, and they start to think about what their community expectations are. So I think that's really valuable, so it'd be interesting to explore some of those ideas. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Karen. That's a nice segue into Go Zero Waste app, actually. It's an app that helps everyone, take waste action, I like to say, because it really is about waste avoidance. And what the app does is that it sort of helps to inspire people into thinking that the best waste is the waste that is not created in the first place. And what the app does is that it tells users where to shop zero waste, plastic free, how to support their local communities, their local economies through that purchasing power. And also it gives users a list of about 100 actions or tips on how to reduce waste in settings like the home kitchen and bathroom. So I really encourage you, if you see one of the posters that have been put up outside the venue, just scan that QR code, download the app and see the many ways that you can take waste action.
Thank you. So I'll kick it off with a question so that you guys don't feel shy to begin with. But what I really would love us to start to kind of talk about, and we're really going to look in this panel. So we just had a panel before, if you missed it, that was really about zero in your own backyard. So looking at those personal practices that you can do. A lot of us maybe have already implemented some of those, like composting, you know, recycling soft plastics back to recycle drop-off facility, etc. But now what we really want to step into is, yes, continuing that we're doing at home, but then how can, as a community, we feel, and how can we feel involved? What can we get behind that's really going to make a big difference? So from the experts sitting here, I'd love to know, are there some policies, practices, initiatives that you have come across, that you've seen, maybe that's outside of Canberra, maybe it's in Australia or somewhere else in the world, that's saying, that's something that we should get behind. This is something that would really make an impact if we all try to get this momentum in Canberra. Is there anything that, I mean, there's probably about 1,000. Yes.
I'll jump in and start this time. One of the movements I'm really inspired by is the right to repair movement. And that takes various guises. We've got, of course, locally with our repair workshops, and there's a number of them around Canberra now. But globally, there is a movement on this. In Europe, it's very much about consumer goods. Interestingly, in the US, it's much more about farm machinery. But the central premise is the same, that products are being built with obsolescence designed into them. They are built in a way where you cannot open them to repair them. They are built without spare parts available, or IP restrictions that means you can't get a repair manual. And we need to push back heavily against this, because the notion of the right to repair is essentially the right to all those things I've just described. You should be able to get tools to fix the piece of equipment. You should be able to buy spare parts. You should be able to get the manual so that either you or a professional repairer, if that's the case, can actually get into the product and fix it. Now, that idea of even professional repairers, because at the moment you cannot take a hold of your products anywhere because you can't get them repaired. And so I think, for me, that does go back to a degree of government action. We need to legislate to require industry to design products in these ways.
Thank you. Yeah, Julie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I totally agree with that. And looking at fashion, sustainable fashion, one thing we look at is, so something doesn't end up being waste at all. So if you take an item of clothing, the item of clothing is fit for purpose. So you don't buy a t-shirt and that t-shirt falls apart the first time you wash it, or it shrinks, or the buttons all fall off and you can't find replacement buttons, or you don't know how to sew the buttons on, or that's a whole other issue. But yeah, I definitely think the repairing of clothing and the demanding that clothing actually be fit for purpose in the first place, and we know what's gone into our clothing. So with the right to repair in clothing, Europe is doing a lot of work at the moment on traceability, transparency and accountability for your clothing. They're talking about, you have to, like, when you sell something, it actually has to last, how long it's going to last for, like, and it has to last for longer than 30 wears, because there is a stat or a figure that goes around saying if you buy an item of clothing, you should expect it to last for 30, you should have it for 30 wears. And I think actually 30 wears is still pretty low. Like, we need to have it to last for as long as possible. Patagonia, which I'm sure most people would have heard of, Patagonia are a really great example of a clothing company that has turned being a clothing company on its head. Their motto is that we're in business to save our planet, not we're in business to make better clothing or to sell you more and more clothing. We're in business to save our home planet. And that sets the direction and the vision for Patagonia. And so what they do intentionally is make, yes, high quality, high priced goods, but they offer free repair, lifetime repair on most of their, if not all of their products. They actually have downloadable guides on how you can repair it. In the US, I haven't heard it happen in Australia, but in the US, over the summertime, they have repair vans that go around to all of the national parks. And so the people who are out hiking, and yeah, it's amazing. People who are out hiking, you can actually bring your goods and they'll actually repair goods that are not Patagonia labelled items either. They've got like a repair people sitting there ready to sew and put the stuffing back in, zip it back up again. So I think it's those kind of initiatives and those kind of businesses that you want to really get behind. And if it takes you a little bit longer to buy the Patagonia jacket, instead of buying 3 jackets that are going to fall apart, we buy the 1 jacket that we're going to have forever and ever, and we know that it's going to be repaired. I think it's that kind of thinking we want to have.
And just quickly, the thing I love about that is there's actually jobs in that as well. There's meaningful jobs.
Yeah, totally.
In a world in which people are seeking meaningful work, that's actually a really inspiring part of that story as well.
Does anybody in the audience, before we kind of start going in more questions or on that topic, have any questions or anything that you wanted to ask the panel around that? Yes.
I've recently seen a concept that our clothing that we purchase should start to have tags similar to nutritional labels around this much water has gone to the manufacturer of this particular t-shirt. Do you think that that's something that is realistic and that we might start to see in the future?
Yes, 2 parts. So I hope that we do start to see that in the future. There's a lot of work going on at the moment with transparency and traceability. There's this awesome company, Sheep Inc. in New Zealand. You can actually trace, you know, where what sheep has made your wool and jumper. You can just like scan the QR code and it will take you back to the sheep and go, this wool has actually come from this farmer's sheep that's gone here and gone here and gone into your product. Amazing. Allbirds and Adidas are another great example of where they've collaborated. So Allbirds is a shoe company, and again, a New Zealand shoe company, and Adidas have collaborated together to try and make a shoe that has a runner that has the least amount of carbon emissions ever. So they've been able to quantify the amount of carbon emissions that usually go into a sneaker. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but let's say it's 30, they've got it down to, I think it's down to 9 now. Like they have been able to dramatically drop it. But a lot of research has gone into that, and there has to be a lot of back-end calculations and thinking. What I love about that example is that they've made their model open source, so anyone can get on and work out how they've calculated the carbon emissions and then can apply that to their own clothing. Because what we're finding with clothing, actually understanding the data that goes into understanding how much water went into growing that crop of cotton, how much water was used for organic cotton versus regular cotton versus where that cotton was grown. If that cotton was grown in Australia, it actually uses far less water than if that cotton was grown in Pakistan. But it's hard to then trace whether our clothing is used Australian cotton, Pakistani cotton, Indian cotton. All of that goes into it. So how do you then put all of that together when the supply chains are so incredibly convoluted and long to then come out with a credible figure at the end saying this particular t-shirt has used 6 litres of water, used this X amount of carbon emissions, transportation costs, you have to calculate all of that in. For Australia, for most of the clothing that we buy in Australia, it has an incredibly high carbon footprint because we don't produce much in Australia at all, if anything. So it's all had to come from somewhere else. And most of the time it started in, say, Indonesia, gone to China, gone to Bangladesh, jumped on a boat, could be sewn in Italy and then come back down to Australia. So thinking about clothing, again, we really have to think about it, what we're buying and who we're buying from and what's gone into it. But the more we can have this traceability, transparency and accountability, the better, because I hope that then someone looks at the label, and then it comes down to behaviour change. Someone can look at that label and understand and say 6 litres of water. Well, 6 litres of water is comparatively a lot. I think my t-shirt should only have 1 litre of water because it's 6 litres compared to what, right? You need to have the figures where you can say, this is good. This is another example of greenwashing that I think you have to be really aware of. Some big labels will put out signs saying this is, for example, ecologically grown cotton. And you're like, okay, that sounds great. And so someone will buy it and go, fantastic, I've got an ecologically grown t-shirt. And I'm like, hang on a minute, isn't all cotton ecologically grown? Like what on earth does that label mean when you stop and think about it? This is a really big multinational business in Canberra. You can go into the mall and look at it and go, I don't actually understand what that means. And so being transparent and open, and perhaps having government regulation about what it is you have to, the information you have to include, how transparent, how accountable are you, is this actually verifiable? All of that needs to be thought about. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, thank you, and thank you. Are there any, well, just speaking to that, so one thing that's really, I mean, there's about 5,000 things that are really important there that I just want to go into. But this is where the question comes up, and even for me saying, okay, I really want to be committed to this journey and making sure that my footprint waste is reduced. So what do I do? What do I do though? Because it's big in the conversation right now, cost of living. You made a very good point in terms of the Patagonia jacket, just as an example here. Saying I really want to buy that product that has such a open, transparent, clear, waste reduced practice, but I can only afford this right now. And when we're looking at so much of our community that's living in that space, how can we then say as a community, say, okay, what should we be doing to make these standards? Like we're saying, we need to have accountability from these producers, companies, businesses, everyone, that it's going to be eventually, hopefully, we're getting to that, everyone has that same standard. But if we're sitting here right now and you're sitting in the audience saying, okay, well, that's not possible for me to buy the Patagonia jacket, but what can I do to help us get there? Does that make sense? Is there any thoughts around that?
Well, just to take the Patagonia example, I love Patagonia. I find some of their stuff a little bit too pricey, although I know that it's good quality and I know that it's going to last a lifetime. But they've actually done a really smart thing. They've actually started to introduce a different business model with Reworn. There's all clothing that they've taken back from people that, you know, has a hole here or the zipper's not working. They've actually refurbished that item of clothing and are selling it back to people on their website at maybe half the cost that it would normally cost. I don't know, but it's, you know, a lot cheaper. And so I think it's about changing business models. It's about embracing secondhand. It's about, yeah, and maybe just saving a little bit for something that's actually going to be really valuable to own. So yeah, they're my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
The point I'd pick up there is that those lower priced goods, if you sort of see that this one's less expensive, they're actually externalising the pollution. They're externalising the unsustainability. And so there's actually a true market failure there. And so the people who are trying to do the right thing are actually at a competitive disadvantage because it does cost a bit more to do it, but those other people are essentially foisting the cost onto us, onto the planet. And so again, that's, and picking up on the point you were making earlier, I think that then comes back to that's where there is a role for government. I obviously have a bias, and this is how I think the political approach is quite important, but there is a role for government to correct that market failure because the market is not going to do it. So if you want to accept a degree of current economic theory, I think that there is a role to step in there and say, we've got to regulate out that market failure and require at least some minimum standards.
Yeah, it's thank you so much. And it's kind of also like what you were saying before as well. And just to go to this is keep rethinking that social structure and what is, you know, like what we accept. I mean, we'll just take phones, for instance. It's become cool to have the latest version of phone. How can we flip that on its head and say, this is amazing because this phone is from 2007. Therefore, I have the coolest phone on the market and that type of idea, instead of it having to be the newest and greatest, you know? And so all of that coming together and shifting the way we think in that space. But in terms of actual practical ideas, you know, would it be looking at, you know, petitions we should be signing or all of those things that, you know, like where can we put our activism besides our money, which is probably really important, but outside of that, yeah.
With clothing companies, one thing I've heard from senior clothing people, you actually send in emails and write letters to businesses and say, we want to know where your clothes have come from. We want to know what's in your clothes. We want to know why your clothing costs this much. They actually sit there and listen to that. Twitter, Instagram, they're actually quite powerful. They have, the big companies have people monitoring and they don't want negative feedback out there. So the more you put in stuff going, hang on, I bought this top for $3. Well, hopefully you wouldn't have bought the top for $3, but someone bought this top for $3. was this top really worth $3? Like, what was the true cost of this? Can you itemize where this has come from? What have you used? What is it being the, you know, what factory has this come from? Tell us where the factories are. That's why things like Baptist World Aids, transparency over clothing businesses, Good On You app, where you can actually get on and search the brand and work out, is this brand okay, not okay, what are they doing? There are different things out there and tools that you can use to demand change, and just don't shop at those companies once you've done a bit of research. And this is where, again, I totally agree with Shane's opening comments that a lot of this gets foisted back onto the individual. But I do think that as individuals living in a society, we have a responsibility to think about what we buy and who we buy from and what we're purchasing. And part of that is taking the time to do a little bit of research. It doesn't have to be a lot, but a little bit of research about what you're about to buy. What is it you're buying? Do you need it? Could you buy it from somewhere else? Do you know the company's credentials that you're buying from? Can you just do a quick search on their annual report? Even if you might not understand some of the terminology that they're talking about, just see what they're saying, get some sort of understanding. If it takes 10 minutes longer, I think that's something, it's a responsibility that everybody has as part of a society.
Yes, Karen.
And the activism that Julie's talking about is getting really easy to do now with Good On You app. You can go on the app and you can see that their sustainability ratings for various brands. You can see the criteria that they measure those brands against. And in terms of, sort of asking questions of brands, that's getting really easy to do as well with Fashion Revolution. You can go on that website and literally copy and paste templates that they've got for people to use when, asking the tough questions of brands. So that's something that is really getting a lot easier and quicker to do. If you only have, say, half an hour, okay, today I want to take some action, or today I want to do something, to help change the narrative, then that's something that can be easily done quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, before we keep talking here, questions, go for it. Yes.
I really like just everything you're saying, Shane, about the economics. That's really cool. I'm aware of market forces, which they do banking, insurance, superannuation stuff. I'm also aware of B corporations. Is there some list of corporations that all meet certain criteria for sustainability or something other than those? Can we talk about that? I'd like to.
It's a really good question. I'm not aware of one. We might be able to crowdsource in the audience. Someone else might know.
No, so B Corp is really good, really good. But B Corp is very stringent, and just because you're not a B Corp organisation doesn't mean that you don't necessarily meet all of the requirements, because it is you have to have money to be able to pay for the B Corp certification, and you need to be able to go through all of their steps, which are quite long and lengthy. But you can be guaranteed, if you are looking at a B Corp business, that they are very, very good, and that they've put a lot of things in place, and you should feel comfortable buying from them. And then your bigger question, I think you're raising a bigger question in terms of what is the definition of sustainable? What is a sustainable business? And that there's a number of standards, so they can have GRI standards, which mean the ISX, there's another ISS number standard. Someone else in the audience might know more about this. But actually determining and defining what is a sustainable business, given there are so many different businesses out there. So what is a sustainable business for a dairy business may be different for a meat business, may be different for a clothing company that is producing sneakers as opposed to a clothing company producing jeans, because they're two totally different materials. And so then determining the threshold and then saying, well, are you exceeding that? Or, it can be really complicated. I did some work a few years ago for a company that was thinking about setting up a certification for a supermarket, for anyone going to a supermarket, and you could go around and find a sticker and say, this is a sustainable product. And they went, so let's just put stickers on things. So whenever you go to the supermarket, you go, that's sustainable. I'm like, on what criteria? Like, where do you even begin to compare products? Like, do you then buy an apple and not a pear? Like, I don't, and it took a long time. And then in the end, I think they realized that they're a little bit they're a little bit nutty. They're nutty in a whole lot of other ways, but that's another conversation. So I think it's really hard, but I think, again, working out what your criteria are and thinking about what for me is important in terms of sustainability. And then what is it that I'm looking for in what I'm buying from is a really important step to take.
And what's complex there is you add in things like labour standards, and you've opened up a whole other set of questions that are, really important, I think, to people who are thinking about sustainability. I also want to make sure that people who are making their products are doing it in a decent condition. So it does get really complicated very quickly.
And what I think is so important, just to add on this note, and I think this is something that comes up in this conversation, is it can be daunting, this feeling like you have to do this perfectly. Like you need to know all of these different, standards and all of these, like do one thing poorly and it's better than not doing anything at all. And that's like, if we can all be really bad at it, but at least we're trying, it's better than just saying, oh my God, this problem is so much bigger than me and I don't even know where to start. So I think that's something to kind of throw in. Yes, with your hand up there.
Hi, it's Brooke Boulton from Sea Change. Some people know me. But Sea Change is an environmental charity that is supposed to help all members to implement something that we have that we don't publicize very well is community forum. So I would encourage everyone to crowdsource this information amongst yourselves. Like if you have looked into, how to go against recent practices or dairy companies treatment cows, pets, and that kind of thing, please go onto our community forum and share that information with other people and get involved in a discussion. Like start fact checking some of this stuff amongst yourselves. Like if you're not happy with the answer that you get back from the company, then start a discussion.
Thank you, bro. Any other questions from the audience? Yes. This is all yours.
Many years ago, when I was working in Greenpeace, we were tossing around the idea of having an anti-advertising global treaty for exactly the reason that the core of unsustainability on our planet is rampant consumerism. And the capitalist model drives rampant consumerism. So I think the answer to your question is probably no. That said, no one's defined a really good alternative yet. I did a bunch of work on that in a previous life as well. And getting a large scale, globally relevant alternative has proved to be so far impossible. That said, I think there's lots of opportunities within the current framework to build up the alternatives, be they co-ops, which are motivated by the common good rather than by the relentless profit. We were thinking about individual actions before, even doing things like choosing the bank you bank with. I changed my bank quite some years ago now. I won't drop names in this place, but there are banks out there that are really committed to doing things differently, and that fundamentally disrupts consumers as well. Your superannuation companies, all of those options, I think, are there. So I think there's not a revolution of economics coming, but there's lots of evolutionary steps we can take that can make the system a lot better.
Yeah. On that note, I just want to say, do we have any tips? And even this is again, crowd sharing here. Like, what are the best resources for us to be going to if we're going to want to search banks, for instance, the super funds and things like that? Like, where should we be going to do those kind of comparisons to those institutions?
Market forces for the banks.
Awesome, great. Sorry, just wanted to.
I know, I was going to say a different point.
Yes, please go ahead.
I've forgotten what it was. About ethical consumerism. And consumers in general, we have to shift our notion of progress. That is my big point on this. And so while it's not directly answering your question, because I feel, again, like consumerism, the way we produce and consume anything is highly problematic. The way our systems are set up and that we focus on, well, our GDP is growing, so therefore this is good. That to me is a fundamental flaw. And so we need to, well, I get that GDP progress is not going to go away anytime soon. We need to add to that, and we need to start talking about like the well-being Index and the Wellbeing Framework in Canberra, we really need to bring that to the fore and say, what is it that we value? What's important to us? What is good? What do we mean by good and what do we mean by progress? And what are the different things that constitute that we should be measuring and placing equal amount, if not more, weight on? So it's not just GDP growth, therefore everyone's fine. It's actually, well, what's the standard of education? What's our health outcome? Who has access to quality primary education, childcare, decent work for decent pay, all of those things that factor into what makes a good life. So once we start to broaden that out and say, actually, life is more about, it is so much more than consuming, then I think we start to have a better society and a better future for everyone.
Thank you. All right, I think there was a few more hands. Yeah, sorry?
Oh, hi. Yeah, my question kind of relates to this notion of local to the global impacts. And amongst the various things that we've talked about, from sort of very private, in our homes kind of things, through to practices and behaviours that are going to shift social norms, right through to good practices. Do you have any thoughts on, amongst all of those things that we could be doing, what is likely to have the greatest impact at that sort of bigger level?
Plant trees. Like it's no, I like. Sorry, I don't mean to sound glib or simplistic, but actually, the most important impact, if you're talking about the global impact, is to plant trees. Plant as many trees as we can, wherever you can. Have your entire backyard planted with trees. Have the front nature strip revegetated and planted with trees. We need more trees. Like the world needs more trees desperately, and so planting a tree, although it might seem, oh, good on you, like planting a tree, what does that actually do? We need to sequester as much carbon as we can, and we just need trees. It's simple, but it's incredibly effective. So get out there and plant trees and make sure no more trees are chopped down.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but I would also add, maybe lobby the decision makers, the influential people in your community. So I joined the Climate Reality Project last year, which was set up by Al Gore about 15, 20 years or so ago. And that's been a really powerful experience. You get training on how to talk to your local MPs, how to write an op-ed or an opinion piece for a newspaper, how to maybe do a radio interview advocating for the climate crisis and for climate action. If you can sort of talk to or have some kind of contact with the key decision makers in your community, it's like, your voice is actually, you might not be represented at that decision making table, but your voice is actually there because you've been listened to. So that's.
Can I speak from personal experience and reinforce that? Because you'd be surprised at how few people walk up to us and talk to us about things. We get plenty of professional lobbyists who come through our door, and that's what they do. But it's very few, not often, that someone will just come up when they have a chance and say, hey, I'm really concerned about whether my clothing is sustainable, or all the many things that people in this room be concerned about. So do walk up to people of influence and actually take the time to tell them. You don't need to take 15 minutes. 3 minutes will do it. Get the point across in the same amount of time. Because they're busy people and they'll try and get away from you otherwise. But actually take the time, or send them an email. Again, we don't get many issue-based emails where people are expressing these things. So I would really support that.
Thank you. That's a really great insight for us to know. All right, yes.
Hi, just heard about the importance of planting more trees, and we heard about the importance of composting, and I think everyone in this forum here understands the importance of composting. So my question is, for the representative key decision makers, being the minister for reduction, emission reduction. So my question is, would you support, and you also proclaim that Canberra ACT is a sustainable city and we are at the forefront, and we know we are at the forefront with many of those policies, climate change and emission reduction. So I would propose to you the idea to make Canberra the first city in Australia that also supports human composting. You probably are aware of the facility in Washington, in America, in years ago. They've already tested human compost in the way it works. It's actually in a controlled environment. And within 4 weeks, a human body produces about 760 liters of compost soil, which is actually used for planting more trees, or the relatives can take it also home and plant more trees. So I would propose to you to consider this idea of the human composting facility here for the Southern Plan, proposed Southern Memorial Park, and to oppose the construction of another third crematorium here next to the Column Grey Nature Reserve. But that no one in here knows that there's already there's a second amended PA up now for consultation, and it is was done under very strange circumstances. It is going to an impact with the EIS environment impact statement. So I really would hope that you would actually do something in regard to the extension is extended so that community members can know about this proposal, and then you would take up the human composting.
There's a lot in that question. Let me start. I actually don't think Canberra is a sustainable city. I think we've done a lot to become more sustainable, but we still have an extremely high ecological footprint. We've reduced it by about 1/3 by moving to 100% renewable electricity, but globally we still have a really high ecological footprint because we are a wealthy community and we consume a lot of stuff and we produce a lot of waste and we have a lot of scope 3 emissions in the way we live our lives. So let me start by making that distinction. You know, the fact that we've moved to 100% renewable electricity, we're improving public transport, these are good steps, but we've got a long way to go. You'd be interested to know, I've never heard of human composting. I'm going to have to go and research that before I'll give you a view, but what we do have in the ACT is natural burials. We have moved specifically to allow that, and at the time I was the Minister for the Cemeteries, and Minister Steele is here and he's got it now, so he might be able to add some more detail, but we have moved to having natural burials. So you can now get buried in the ACT, you go in the ground without a wooden coffin, because wooden coffins actually take a lot of resources and they don't break down and all those kind of things. But you can just literally go in the ground in a hessian sack, in a part of the, it's not a hessian sack, but you know what I mean, that kind of thing. There's a proper name for it. Sorry, I just forgot it.
Sack works. Let's just go with sack.
It looks like a sack. But you just go in the ground in a part of the Canberra cemeteries and you literally do break down in the soil over time. So I think that's a start. I reckon it'd be a really interesting public discussion to talk about human composting. I reckon there'd be some people would find that very uncomfortable to start with. So it's an interesting conversation. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
A lot of young people like they all said, yeah, I'd rather live this earth with a sustainable footprint and not be cremated. That causes submission.
Sure.
And in particular, to this special proposal for another crematorium directly in the corner of the Calgary Nature Reserve, which has an endangered population of swift parrots, and this is also cited on that PA side, and all the other implications that we have on the fauna. There is critically endangered yellow box and plenty woodgum in the reserve, and it never went to an EIS. It was assessed in the wrong track. So please do something about it. And just to finish on this, there's an industry report by the Cemetery and Crematorium Authority that says that we already have an oversupply of cremation here in the ACT. They can provide you with all those details.
The good news is, in terms of individual action, you can go into the afterlife right now in Canberra in a sustainable way with a natural burial.
It takes just far too long with the natural burial. This other one is done in 4 weeks and you turn it into beautiful soil and you can plant.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
I'm interested in doing that. I have to go and if it could be at the Arboretum,
I'll suggest it to the Arboretum as a fundraising opportunity, perhaps.
I think they'll get a lot of fundraisers that way. I'd say yes to that. What a beautiful view. Just be mindful of time here for this panel. So I want to see if there's any more kind of burning questions from the audience, because we're here for you. Yes.
Which means that we go to we get
You can't even update it. Yeah, you can't use it. Yes. Experts, what would you say? Otherwise, I think what's kind of thing is make noise. I think the social platforms is a really good way to say that we don't accept that we don't accept buying a phone that we know will have a limited battery life programmed into it, so we are forced to buy a new one. I mean, it's that flipping it, saying if enough of us are noisy enough in the right way, in a polite way, in a way that is helping these conversations be positive, then I think there is room. But unfortunately, it seems like, and we would be able to add this, experts, that, you know, it's not something that will happen overnight. But if I use this example in the earlier panel discussion, it's like if we look only a few years ago at when you made that switch from plastic bags in the supermarket, you know, and there was like the uproar at the time from some sides saying, oh, this isn't going to work, and all of these things. And now it's very rare to see somebody walking into a shop without a handful of reusable bags. And so we can actually make those social changes quite quickly once we get behind them. But I know you can. Yeah, no, I know it's definitely not a tick the box. We've solved that one for sure. But I think there is, you know, things have changed. There is change.
And I think also with your phones, like at least there are places, I know this isn't great, at least there are places like Mobile Muster where you can go and get your phones recycled, and there are exchanges that happen on phone services where they will take it back and give you a credit, and so at least that's happening. But I do think the whole thing, and again taking it back to fashion, how we design products in the first place is so incredibly critical, and so focus really needs to be put on, if we want a proper circular economy to start, you have to start with the design and designing out waste from the beginning and making it, regulating it, making people accountable for what it is they're putting into the market. I go back to that point again, like if we can design it properly from the beginning and saying, actually, your phone has to last longer than 6 years. My phone stopped working, or stopped ringing about 3 years ago. And at first I went, oh, now I should probably get another phone. My kids have been going, yeah, a proper phone. I actually love the fact now that my phone doesn't make any noise. So it's up to me to check it when I feel like it, which isn't very often. It's awesome.
Christine, if I can pick up on something you said, I think we need to not be too polite. The system is broken. The survival of our planet depends on us, frankly, being a little bit angry sometimes and demanding more rapid change than we're currently seeing. We don't need to be nasty, but we need to be focused because we don't have time to waste.
Great, thank you. So we're going to wrap up. Just going to give you guys final parting words. If there's one thing that you want to leave, message, action, that you want to leave everyone here with, say, what is it? Quickly, we'll go through the panel and then we're going to go to the next one pretty much straight after this. So it's good. Lots of content.
Okay, I'm stealing mine from Hannah Maloney, who is awesome. I interviewed her on our podcast a while ago. You should go and listen to it. And it's to set yourself your values and your goals and to live by them.
Thank you. Yes.
I think don't be overwhelmed by the enormity of it. There is so much opportunity out there to make a difference, and each of us can make it in our own way, be it in our workplace, in our activism, in our personal consumption choices, all of those things. No, be optimistic.
I would say take heart. I would say that anyone who feels they're kind of a bit lonely in the journey, there's so much support out there, so many organisations, Seed Change, Go Zero Waste app, we've spoken about Good On You app. There's so many tools out there, so much training that you can do, so many books about how to have climate conversations with people. There's so much out there, and really is just about maybe setting aside some time to think, okay, what is it that I want to focus on? What is it that it really sort of makes me feel passionate, and just going for it.